Our text today is from Job. And instead of reading along like you're inclined to do, listen today. Listen with your ears, because this is a text that was meant to be heard. Job, starting in chapter 19. I see you sneaking a peek. I'm just kidding. Be yourself. Job 19. Though I cry violence, I get no response. Though I cry for help, there is no justice. He has blocked my way, I cannot pass. He has shrouded my paths with darkness. He has stripped me of my honor and removed the crown from my head. He tears me down on every single side until I am gone. He uproots my hope like a tree. Verse 23. Oh, that my words were recorded, that they were written on a scroll, that they were inscribed on an iron tool with lead, or engraved in rock forever. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. After my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I will see myself, him, with my own eyes, I and not another. How my heart yearns within me. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So for today's sermon, I turned to the lectionary text, which I actually haven't been preaching from the lectionary until today. The lectionary are scriptures that have been set out by the church to read every week. And I was surprised to see this text from Job as an option. I was surprised because I think of November as a season of Thanksgiving, and Job is a text that doesn't give me those warm, fuzzy feelings of gratitude. Now, of course, if you know the history of the lectionary far precedes our Thanksgiving holiday. But I still didn't think that Job felt appropriate to preach in November. But then, the more I thought about it, the text from Job is exactly the text to preach in November, because I know that there are people who feel a lot like Job, and that can make a season of Thanksgiving a little tricky for us. So let me tell you a little bit about Job and his story. And I think you will see why gratitude isn't the word that jumps out at me. Job was said to be a righteous man, a family man, a man who treated his laborers fairly, who was involved in his community, a leader that others looked to for wisdom and guidance. And Job was going about his daily life, trying to be the best man that he could, following God, caring for others, taking care of his land and of his livestock, working hard. I'd consider him a salt-of-the-earth kind of guy. I could imagine him living here in Warner Robins, working really hard to provide for his family. But little did Job know that his life was about to be turned over, because up in the heavenly realm, God and Hasatan, we might call this Hasatan figure devil or Satan. It's not quite clear who he is, but we know he's not the best kind of guy, or being, rather. So God and Hasatan are having this conversation, and God and Hasatan they have a wager, and the pawn of this wager is Job. And before Job even knew what hit him, he lost everything: his land, his livestock, his own children, and then his health. This is the story of Job. This is where we meet Job in this text. We meet him sitting in the midst of his despair, with friends who have gathered to give him advice, but all of their advice has fallen short for Job. And then Job has some bold accusations for God. He says, though I cry violence, I get no response. Though I cry for help, there is no justice. God, you have blocked my way so I cannot pass. God, you shrouded my path in darkness. Hear this not as an observation or a lament from Job about his situation. Hear this as an accusation. You tear me down on every side, God, until I am gone. You uproot me like a tree. When we hear the story of Job, most of us ask, why is this even in our sacred scriptures? It's the story that doesn't quite fit. It's the story that makes God look bad, not just bad, but kind of mean. In this story, it is the story that makes us wonder about who God is. And isn't it also the story that we can all relate to on some level? What you need to understand is that this text is not supposed to inform your theology in a systematic way. Rather, this is a text for us to connect with others and their shared experiences of suffering. This is the text that reminds us that scriptures speak to our very human experiences, that the Word of God doesn't shy away from the hardest things life has to offer. And in this season that we have set aside for giving thanks, maybe we need a reminder that even God, the author of our scriptures, knows that not every November can be a season of Thanksgiving. Of course, I believe that taking time to count our blessings is important, that giving thanks for all that God has given us is vital, that it is good and important to have a grateful heart, and that gratitude is an expression of love that we are all called to. But what I also believe to be true is that our lives go through seasons. We have seasons where thankfulness is on our hearts and minds, but we also have seasons that we feel like Job, seasons that we are Job. And in those seasons, we have to honor our experiences. Yes, we look in every moment for things to be grateful for, but we don't have to do so in a superficial way that ignores the depth of pain that we can experience in this life. And that is why the story of Job matters. That's why it's in our scriptures. We see Job struggle and wrestle and cry out in anger to God. We don't see a lot of thankfulness in this book. And why should we? Job is in a bad spot. He has lost everything. Remember, he has even lost his children, those who are closest to him. There's a temptation to make our theology and our beliefs one that favors not hurting God's feelings or questioning God. When something terrible happens, our friends, or we even ourselves, much like Job's friends, want to give an answer that makes it all better. They tell us that God is just trying to teach us a lesson, or God would never give you more than you can handle. But isn't that a cruel way to teach a lesson? And maybe it is more than we can handle. That's why Job's story matters. It matters because it tells us that we don't have to be thankful when we are victims of injustice. We don't have to be thankful when we lose the person or the thing that matters the most to us. We don't have to be thankful when we look around and see war and poverty and hardship. That there are things that it is appropriate to shake our fists at God. George MacDonald says, complaint against God is far nearer to God than indifference. When we engage with God, even in our anger and our hurt, we are doing what Job did. And Job was a righteous man, don't you forget that. We are wrestling through the conflict. And this is a part of the healing process. In one of my sociology classes in college, we talked about how when we experience conflict with someone, if we are able to make it through to the other side, we actually become closer to that person. The study we read, we learned that we found that, the study that we learned about found that conflict in relationships actually brings people closer together in the end when they were able to work through it in a healthy and life-giving way. And that's what we see in Job. We see that Job works through his experience with God, not with a blind thankfulness, but with full confrontation. And I believe that is what begins the healing for Job. And the healing is a new season of life. Just as there are seasons that we don't feel so thankful, there are also seasons in which we heal. Seasons in which we begin to find joy again. Seasons in which we begin to feel thankful once again. Because we've always had things to be thankful for, but sometimes it's not the season. And sometimes the healing process is long and hard. Sometimes to begin the process, we need help. Just as Job reached out to his friends in his time of greatest need, we too must reach out to those who love us, and sometimes even those trained in healing, like counselors and therapists. Because after our season of suffering, we can move towards seasons of healing and of hope. Not that the suffering goes away entirely, but that we can cope with it in a way that gives room for new life. You see it in the story of Job. In verse 7, he says, I get no response. But we know at the end of the story, God appears to Job in a whirlwind. And in that whirlwind, he answers some of Job's questions. Job gets the response, or a response, that he has been seeking. But I think what Job really wanted was to be heard. It's a new season for Job. In verse 8, Job says that he is walking in darkness, but in verse 26, he says that he will see God, a new season. In verse 10, Job has no hope, but in verse 25, he says that he knows his Redeemer lives, another new season. And of course, these seasons don't erase the suffering of the prior season, but they remind us that no one season lasts forever. When I was in a particularly tough season, I remember someone telling me, and this really changed the way I viewed seasons. She said, you have never had one experience or feeling that has lasted forever, have you? And of course, I said, no, I've never had one feeling that lasts forever. And she said, so this season will not last forever. That's the thing about Job, that his suffering shaped his life forever. It molded him, and he probably never went fully back to who he was. But he does begin to see hope again. So friends, whatever season you find yourself in this November, be kind to yourself. Be kind to others, because they too are going through a season. Know that the one thing that is constant in all of our seasons is that God is with us, that God walks with us. If you are in a season of gratitude, that is great. Feel thankfulness with all parts of who you are. Be intentional to express your thankfulness for those in your life who make it so special. But if you are in a season that you don't feel so thankful, be of good heart and know that you are not alone, that even Job, a righteous man, was there once too. And most importantly, be open to healing. Make time and space to reach out when you need help. Make the bold accusations you need to make, knowing that God isn't scared of conflict, that God desires to be close to you. Sit in this season as long as you need, but always be ready for the new season. Because just even like the coldest winters, spring is just around the corner.